This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
James catches, puts up a three. Won't go. Rebound Bosh. Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang! Tie game with 5 seconds remaining.
Well, it was that shot that sent the game to overtime. Ray Allen comes up clutch, but the Heat would pull out Game 6 of the 2013 NBA Finals, and that's what we're talking about tonight on Distant Replay. Welcome in. I'm Ben George. He's Mike Noto. We go back only 7 years, one of our more recent games, but a very big game in the timeline of LeBron James's career and for the Miami Heat. And we talk about it tonight on Distant Replay. So, Mike, how you doing? Good to talk to you again.
Hey, Benny. How you doing, man? How's everything going?
Everything's good on my end. You?
Great, man. Everything's going good. Thank you.
Good to go back to this one, right? I mean, this game is still in our recent memory a little bit, but still I think there's a number of things that we picked up along the way watching this game again that we'd kind of forgot about.
Yeah, you know, it's little things about this game you forget about. I mean, you remember the big moments. And just looking back and, you know, LeBron James undoubtedly, you know, in the last 2 decades of the NBA, you know, the NBA's best player, right? So, and how big of a game this was for his legacy, I don't think can be understated, as we're going to get to. And that's really the story.
Yeah, that's the plan tonight. We'll go through the entire game, start to finish. We'll give some thoughts on the game as it progresses, big plays, big moments, momentum, that sort of thing. We'll set up the game here in a second, what's important about this game leading into it, kind of setting the stage for this Game 6, and then some thoughts after the fact on what we witnessed and what we watched here the second time around. But let me first remind you, distantreplaypodcast.com is our website. You'll find this game. You'll be able to watch it. The YouTube link's right there. You can watch the game in its entirety as we watched it there on our website, plus all of our past games as well. We have them all archived on the website. Every episode's there. You can find us on Twitter at Distant Podcast, also on Instagram as well, and of course on YouTube. Thanks again to everybody on YouTube that subscribed along the way. So let's dive into this one. June 18th, 2013, just 7 years ago, was the Heat and Spurs. So Spurs come in this game with a 3-2 lead, looking to close out Miami. And let's just kind of let's set the stage on these two teams, Mike. You're more of the NBA guy, so I'm going to kind of pass it off to you. But let's talk about the Heat first, kind of where they are in their I guess, their franchise's history, but also this LeBron James in the Big Three era of the Heat.
Yeah, so LeBron comes to the Heat in the 2011 season, okay? The first year he comes, they lose to the Mavericks in the finals, the Dirk Nowitzki Mavericks team. Probably, I mean, I've never heard LeBron talk about this, but just from the outside looking in, probably the low point of LeBron's career. I mean, they put together this Big Three. They lose the first year to the Mavericks in the finals. The next year, 2012, LeBron wins his first title. They beat the Kevin Durant, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, Oklahoma City team pretty handily in the finals to win in 2012. And then now you have them facing sort of an old guard San Antonio team in the finals here. And this series would sort of shape, to me, where the legacy of LeBron James would go from here, and largely in terms of taking some pressure off him by getting that second championship.
Yeah, indeed. And that's kind of, you know, the Heat, this was a big one for him. And that's why we went back to it. And this was a pivotal game in this pivotal series for these two teams. And, you know, for the Spurs too, I mean, this is, obviously we remember the Spurs in this era, you know, Tim Duncan, Parker, Ginobili. But really, I think the bigger story going back and watch this one again is the emergence of Kawhi Leonard. And we've seen what he's become. I mean, arguably one of the, you know, I don't know, would you consider him top 3 player in the NBA? I don't know if he's quite at that level, pretty close, but he does everything. We've seen him win championships. He's played in a number of NBA finals, but this is really, you can kind of see the start of him becoming a game changer in the NBA.
Yeah, so at this point in time, Kawhi Leonard, first of all, clearly a top 3 player in the NBA. That's not debatable. But you go back then, you know, it's 2013. He's 21 years old. All right. The Spurs as a whole, this dynasty sort of mirrors a lot when you think of the Patriots, and the fact that they win 4 championships between 99 and 2007. Then they have a gap here between 07 and 13 where they don't win any championships. Their core is getting older, right? So Parker, Ginobili, and Duncan, all 30 plus heading into this game. Leonard, again, infusing that energy, that young energy, and the Spurs sort of going from a grind it out, let's go through Tim Duncan type team the whole decade of the 2000s to now completely changing their style into an up and down, run up and down the court, high tempo type team. And a lot of that can be attributed to their core, Parker, Duncan, Ginobili, getting a little older and sort of changing the way they play, and then the emergence of Leonard. And I had forgotten the next year in 2014, Leonard was a huge part of this team. I had forgotten how critical of a role he played even this early in his career, though.
Yeah, when you go back and watch this game, he was really good too. I mean, I think remembering back on that game, I think he kind of stood out a little bit, but I don't think enough was made about how well he was playing just all around in this game. I mean, the shot, the attacking the basket, being able to score around the basket, but defensively as well, rebounding. I mean, he was a complete player in this game and a big part of their success early on. I don't think he got as much credit because of the big three. Obviously, he had been there and been doing it for so long, but we saw how important Kawhi Leonard was to this team in this game. Coaching staffs, Mike, Popovich on one side, we've seen him for a while. Then you got Spoelstra on the other. Kind of Spoelstra at this point too. What do you remember about where he was in his career at this point in terms of what people expected of him, what they thought he would actually be able to accomplish with that team? Because there's a little turbulence there at a time, right?
Yeah, I think what most people thought of Spoelstra at this time, unfortunately, I think the opinions changed. And I think he was sort of coming out of it here at this time, but that he was just, a protege of Riley. That Riley was controlling a lot more of the day-to-day from behind the scenes up in the front office, and that maybe Spoelstra was just there to steer the ship. I think you look back on it now, and Spoelstra's reputation now is he's considered one of the best coaches in the NBA. And if you look at LeBron James' career as a whole, has there ever been a coach? He had Spoelstra as a coach for 4 seasons. Has there ever been a coach that he didn't outwardly try to replace?
Yeah.
That, did any other coach even last 4 straight years with LeBron James? I don't think there has been.
That's a good point.
So you look at it back on that, and again, right now, I mean, he's regarded one of the better coaches in the NBA. But back then, there was still can he lead this team of all, very big personalities and very established NBA players? And we're starting to get to the point entering this game where he's sort of setting his own legacy and standing on his own 2 feet as a coach.
And it's not fair to him either because, he was a few years into his coaching career with the Heat. But, if you don't win a championship with this roster, you're considered a failure. So it's either win it all or not, or bust. And that's why the expectations on him were so high. Because I think everybody was like, hey, Mike, you could coach this team and win a championship, right? So if you're not accomplishing that, then you're not a very good coach. But, again, not fair. And I think he's proven that. And I think listening into him during this game, they had him mic'd up. He was wired for ESPN's broadcast. I thought it was pretty good and very interesting down the stretch to kind of hear him coaching up his team. I think he was kind of spot on. He didn't try to do too much. He just kind of kept them in line, kept his perspective, and I thought that was really interesting down the stretch, and we can talk about that a little bit later in the game as well.
Very poised, right?
Yeah, very
poised.
Yeah, especially in
I
that
agree
moment.
with that.
So, I guess anything else you want to set this game up with anything important storyline-wise before we jump in?
No important storylines that I can think other than what we covered. I mean, I don't know if you want to get into the rosters now.
Yeah, let's jump into the rosters.
Yeah, so the rosters, if you count these up, right, you had the Spurs. If you're going to count Tracy McGrady, who had a very limited role in this series,
right?
The Spurs have 5 Hall of Famers on their roster and Popovich. So the Hall of Famers on the roster would be Duncan, Ginobili, Parker. I'm going to call Leonard a Hall of Famer for what he's become, and McGrady. And then on the Heat side, you have 4 Hall of Famers in Bosh, LeBron, Wade, and Ray Allen. Okay. These rosters, I think these are the best 2 teams I've ever seen play in the finals since the Jordan era. And what I mean by that is there's no key injuries. Most of these stars are either at their apex or still very effective, even though they may be a little bit beyond their primes. Like, this is prime LeBron James.
Right.
Okay. This is LeBron James on the offensive end and defensive end, and most notably the defensive end at his absolute prime. You have Wade coming out of his prime a little bit. It's starting with this season. And then you have Parker still very much in his prime, a little bit of a decline in Ginobili and Duncan, but they're still very effective. So overall, these rosters, I mean, just stellar all around.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because we don't talk about this series as much in terms of like it was one of the all-time great series. Or maybe we do, talk about that a little bit. But I agree the point that these are two top to bottom loaded teams, very fundamentally sound, played great basketball on both ends of the court, well coached. I mean, just all around a very good series. And as you see, and LeBron mentioned in postgame, these are the two best teams. That's why we're going Game 7, and that's kind of where we are right now. So I think that's a great observation and a great thing to point out heading into this is how loaded both these teams were. And I forgot T-Mac was on the team. I like T-Mac early on in his career. He was a fun player to watch. But if you had told me he was part of the Spurs team, I completely blanked out on that. But he played 14 minutes total in this series.
Yeah, even the role players who understand their roles, when you look back on really good teams, are so important.
Mm-hmm.
So let's for the Spurs, you had Danny Green.
Yep.
Boris Diaw played a huge role in this game. You have Gary Neal. For the Heat, you have guys like Mike Miller, Mario Chalmers, just guys who sort of, even Ray Allen at this point, a role player.
Oh, yeah.
Guys who understood where to be, what their role was, and they were accepting of their roles, which was the biggest part.
Yeah, it was the biggest part. And yeah, I mean, Ray Allen, absolutely a role player in this point. And he had just been picked up before this season, Mike, as a free agent, added to this roster. And this was, I look back at his career, this is the only year over his entire career, which spanned until he was 38 years old, where he didn't start a single game the entire season. He even started a few games, handful of games the following season, his final in the NBA, but this year did not start a single game, but obviously had a huge impact when it mattered most. And that's why they brought him in, right? I mean, for that moment, for that big shot to bring that experience and that clutch gene to the team, and he came through. So let's dive into it, Mike. All right, so this game, ESPN, their telecast of the finals. You have Mike Breen, you have Jeff Van Gundy, you got Doris Burke on the sideline. Great crew. I just think, going back and watching this game, Mike, I don't know what it was about it, but I just didn't feel overall this game like it had a ton of energy. Maybe it felt like a regular season game almost, and just in terms of presentation, because you expect a little bit more in a game like this, right? More graphics, more elements, and maybe we got more that was edited out for the re-air that we actually saw on YouTube. But I feel like we got most of the content of the show. It just didn't feel like it was a deciding game essentially for the Spurs, a game that the season could be the final game of the season. It didn't feel like it had that production value to it. I don't know what it was. Maybe that's just me. It just didn't have that feel of, one of the biggest games of LeBron's career, of the NBA, especially that season.
I mean, I agree with you. There wasn't much theatrics in the broadcast, but I think that's a reflection of how good of announcers this crew is and was.
Mm-hmm.
They're just consummate professionals. They know the game inside and out. They know when to lay out and let sort of the action, take control as opposed to their voices. And look, you're not going to get me to say a bad thing about Mike Breen or Jeff Van Gundy, right? Because so for those of you who are new to listening, I'm a Knicks fan, right? So Mike Breen has been the voice of the Knicks for a very long time on their local television network. And Jeff Van Gundy, I mean, look, he's the last good coach my team's had. I know it was 20 years ago, so you're not going to ever get me to say a bad thing about Van Gundy or Breen. Remember, this is the time period where Mark Jackson is coaching the Warriors, so you're used to seeing him with these two. He's not there at this time. And then Doris Burke has just turned into a very solid very solid analyst as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And in this game, she was playing the role of the sideline reporter, which she was great at.
By the way, you mentioned the Knicks. Do you know where the Knicks were this season? Going back to the NBA standings for 2012, 2013.
No, I don't, Ben.
They were second in the East, Mike. 54-28.
Oh, okay. So this is the one good year they've had. This is the year with
exactly
Mike Woodson, Carmelo Anthony, that team. Okay.
Yeah, they were.
So the one good season
it feels like forever since they won 50 games in a season. But yeah, only 7 years ago.
Second, you said what? They were 2 seed. You said.
Yep.
And they still underachieved because they lost to Indiana, didn't they?
I don't remember where they finished in the playoffs.
They lost to Indiana because yeah. So they still underachieved when all was said and done.
So we hop into it. First quarter of this game, setting the stage. I think another big story coming into this too, Mike, kind of setting the stage was Danny Green. You mentioned him as a big role player, but he'd already broken the NBA Finals record for threes made. So that was a big part of it and a big part of why this team had been so successful. But we kicked things off in this first quarter, and we'll kind of run through some of the bigger moments. First quarter, LeBron, as we kind of seen, I think, a lot, he kind of eases into a game. You kind of saw what he's able to do in terms of getting his team involved. 3 assists to 3 different players in the first couple of minutes in that game. And you kind of see him. And then on the other end, Tim Duncan, it was so much fun watching him play again because guy just does, he has a huge repertoire on offense. You know, you see the bank shot, you see a pump fake, easy layup to get around his defender. You see a fadeaway jumper from the free throw line. The guy in the first handful of minutes, you kind of see everything that this guy's able to do.
Yeah, there's a reason his nickname was the Big Fundamental, right?
Right.
He's put on a clinic in this quarter, and he did for much of the first half, as we're going to get to. He was great in this quarter. The Spurs, as you're introduced to them, not introduced to it, but you're reminded of them playing at that fast pace, great pace and shooting by both teams in this quarter. You have Mike Miller. You know, you mentioned Danny Green and his NBA Finals record for three-pointers. Mike Miller, 10 for 13 from threes in this series to this point.
Yeah, crazy.
Which is crazy also because, you know, he's a guy who plays. It's not like he has a limited role. And a good first quarter, very evenly played first quarter by both teams.
A couple other notes I made in the first quarter. Of course, Shane Battier comes in, and in his first minute in the game, he draws a charge. Right? Okay, big surprise there, and he's a quintessential role player. He does that in this game as well. This series had been a game of runs, and ESPN points it out in the broadcast that this had been both teams. Either way, the team that had won had gone on a huge run at some point, and kind of get our first taste of the run early on in this game. Miami goes on an 8-1 run to end the quarter, takes a 27-25 lead. I think Tim Duncan, as you mentioned, put on a clinic, 6 for 6 first quarter from the field. Boris Diaw defensively was a factor early on. He's becoming a storyline too. They talk about his impact defensively in this series, and we kind of see him stepping up there early on. So after the first quarter, 27-25, you got Miami in the lead.
Hey, one thing about the first quarter before we get into it. I'm sorry to distract, but it's worth it. What about that dunk by Kawhi in the first quarter?
Yeah, and I was looking at, I was thinking about some stuff to put on the Instagram account. And I might still put this up, but yeah, when he had that dunk, I had forgotten about that dunk, but that's one of the best posterizations you will see in the NBA. That dunk over Mike Miller was disgusting.
It was like one of those things. Like, oh, I remember Kawhi was on this team now, and I forgot how good he was even when he was 21. Like,
yeah, oh yeah, I also remember Mike Miller was on this team because I've seen this highlight before as well. Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. That was a great play early on in that first quarter. Second quarter. Again, I don't have a ton of notes here, Mike, so you can add what you want to this quarter. But, you know, again, it was still Tim Duncan, Tony Parker playing really well. And then the big two on the other side, LeBron and D-Wade, still relatively ineffective and really hadn't found a groove at all in this game so far. LeBron ends the half with 9 points, Wade with 6. And the Spurs, they finished on a 17-4 run to end this quarter and take a 50-44 halftime lead.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, some quick hits here on the second quarter. That 17-4 run to end the quarter. Duncan with 25 of the Spurs' 50 points in the first half. He started the game 8 for 8. Now and Ginobili, I know you followed the NBA pretty closely this time period, but Ginobili's at the point in his career where it seemed like he would have one incredible game, one not good game.
Yeah.
So the game before this, the game 5, great game. This game, and the way it's starting, you could tell it's not going to be a good Ginobili game. He was very bad to start this game. It seemed like this always happened to him, alternating good game, bad game. And remember, he's played a 6-man role a lot. He started this game. Now with the Heat, something interesting you see with the Heat sort of materializing in this quarter was a very common game plan that experienced teams would do with the Heat, where they would all but drop off LeBron James and Dwayne Wade into the paint when they played defense on them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was twofold. Number one, they had yet in this point of their career to prove they could hit outside shots consistently. And secondly, they were just devastating to anyone who tried to guard them one-on-one, and most notably in transition. So you notice Popovich just like screaming. I mean, you could hear him on the broadcast telling either Boris Diaw or Kawhi Leonard, whoever was guarding Wade or LeBron, to sag into the paint. And that would become a common theme in this game, where they would be giving LeBron James and Wade any outside shot they wanted in a half-court set. Yeah,
throughout. That's, especially in the fourth quarter, you start seeing that become a big play. But I mean, that was a big reason for their success throughout this game. I'm glad you brought that up. So halftime, again, not a lot to add there. It's been a back and forth game, a game of runs, small runs so far. we'd see a bigger one a little bit later on. Third quarter, though, you got a three by Ginobili to start things. And again, you mentioned not a huge impactful game for Ginobili. This was his only three of the game. He'd finished just with 9 points in this game. But that three is hit, and all of a sudden it's a 9-point game. You look up, and it's like, wow, Spurs are up 9. It's still a lot of basketball left to be played, but kind of feel them getting a hold of this game a little bit. But as we saw, Miami put an emphasis on defense late in this game, the second half. But the defense really began taking over in this third quarter a little bit, starting with LeBron. And you talked about LeBron being in his kind of defensive prime at this point in his career. And you could see that. I mean, it seemed like, obviously he's playing a ton of minutes, so he can't go full out all the time. But it seemed like when he turned it on in these spurts, it was so difficult to score on this Heat team, and especially LeBron. It just seemed like he would elevate to a different level, and you could kind of see that here during the stretch in the third quarter. Yeah,
I have in my notes, James comes out very aggressive on defense. I mean, when you could notice someone being aggressive on defense, that says something, because sometimes that can go under the radar a little bit when you're watching, but it was very evident. And remember, Wade didn't start this quarter, so I think James sort of thought, I have to put more of an onus on my defense and really be a presence. But with that said, the Spurs are up 12 with 4 minutes to go in the quarter, and Duncan has 30 points at this point. And you think you're on a way to just like hey, Duncan has such a good game, it doesn't matter what anyone else does. Mm-hmm. Like you have a feeling watching this game that that's where we're headed. That's how good Duncan is playing to this point, and it looks really bleak for the Heat.
Yeah, and you could kind of feel it in the third quarter too. I thought this was a very interesting quarter because Spurs come out, score early. The Heat get back. They start to show a little bit of life. The fans kind of get into it a little bit. Then all of a sudden, the Spurs go on 11-0 run in a minute and a half, as you mentioned, get up by 12. And then the Heat, they kind of start inching back into it, score 5 straight, get the momentum back in it again. And I thought it was very interesting, and this is kind of a theme for the whole game. After they got those 5 straight, they come back down 3 straight times down the court, Mike. It was, I think, LeBron, then maybe D-Wade. Both thought they got fouled. And then they get hit with an offensive foul. And it was like 3 straight times in the quarter just complaining to the refs. The fans were getting into it. I think the refs suck chant was going on in the background. But it was just kind of that feel the whole game of there's a lot of complaining and whining to the officials. And in fairness, I don't think the officials had a great game overall. I mean, I think there were some inconsistencies. They didn't call a great game from start to finish. But it just seemed like right now, and maybe it's the frustration of, okay, our back's against the wall. Things are not going away right now. We're not getting any calls. But it seemed like over the top, and I know this has kind of become LeBron's kind of got this image of complaining a lot about calls, but you can kind of see it here in this quarter. It was happening a lot.
Yeah, and at this point, and I remember watching this live because, again, this was a big series if you're an NBA fan. But LeBron James, the best player on the planet at this point, still a doubt on how clutch he was in these big moments. I think we forget that because the narrative sort of changed on him at this point. But he has 0 field goals in this quarter, okay? And this is coming off of a 2011, not coming off directly, but a 2011 finals where when things started to not go the Heat's way in terms of calls, like you mentioned, they folded against the Mavericks. So you still have that in the back of your mind, even though they won in 2012.
Yeah, 0 for 3 from the field. He did have 5 free throws in this quarter, but 0 for 3 from the field in the third quarter for LeBron. And the Spurs walk out of this quarter heading into the fourth with a nice little 75-65 lead. Everybody's playing pretty well for the Spurs. You hadn't seen them kind of take a step back too much. They've answered maybe some punches by the Heat right now, and they feel like they have a bit of control here. And it seems like things are kind of unraveling a little bit for the Heat with the way that quarter ends, the frustration with the calls. So we head to the fourth, and again, going back to Spoelstra, we get an interview to start the fourth. Doris Burke, hey, what's the key if you guys are going to turn around this quarter and come back and win this game? He said we're going to need our best defensive effort of the series. And we see the Wired calls. He's saying the same thing. We got to be smart. We got to get after on this end, but we got to be smart. No stupid fouls, and we got to be poised on the other end. Trust each other, right? You built this trust. Rely on each other. Lean on each other here. And I think that was the key. The defense was the key, and you saw that it was the mantra going into it, and they actually executed it.
Yeah, and I always mention when we do these basketball podcasts how I used to coach. Okay, but especially if you look at this from a coach's standpoint. What he did here was masterful because what he did to his team, who probably had a million emotions rattling around in their head at this point, what he did was give them a strategy that they were completely in control of, right? You're completely in control when you play basketball of how hard you try on defense, knowing that will lead to little spurts, little runs, and the offensive production that was a little lacking at this point. I thought that, and how calm Spoelstra was, like we talked about at the top of the episode, he to me, this is where now he turns the corner as a coach and really guides them through this fourth quarter.
It's a great point about the offense, too, because Miami had scored just 38 points in the second and third quarter combined. 38 points over those 2 quarters, and that's why they found themselves down 10. But they come out of the gates quickly. They turned it on, take advantage, too, of Duncan and Parker both starting on the bench in this quarter, which I think, I know they needed a rest, and they were only out. I think Duncan was out maybe 2-3 minutes, maybe Parker a little bit longer. But during that stretch, you had a lineup in there for the Spurs that Miami was taking advantage of quite a bit and scored a lot. Got on a stretch there and kind of built the momentum, and it kind of snowballed. Halfway through this quarter, all of a sudden, you got a tie game with 6.5 minutes left on 19-7 run to start this quarter for the Heat. Gives them the actual lead here. Just a half minute later, about the 6-minute mark, they grab the lead. And it's like, man, all of a sudden, okay, this is the Heat team that everybody expected. This is LeBron. This is this team stepping up. But you got to know these veterans for the Spurs are going to step up and respond, and that's what you get down the stretch. But the way the Heat came out of that quarter, after the last 2 quarters not looking particularly well, as I mentioned, into the third, they frustrated. There's not a lot they can really hold on to. But you pointed out, Spoelstra got them in line, and 6 minutes later, they got the lead in this game.
Yeah, we'll go through some of Greg Popovich's substitution patterns a little bit later down the stretch. I think that was a pivotal turning point in this game.
Yeah.
But the 8-0 run highlighted by Mike Miller hitting a 3 with no sneaker on, which I thought was pretty funny.
Yeah.
I obviously forgotten about that. I don't know if you noticed the moment where James was going up for a lob, right? The Heat have all the momentum. James is going up for a lob, and instead of letting him go up for the lob, Ginobili pretty much elbows him in the throat.
Yeah.
Remember that? And I thought that was a cool moment because it's kind of like an old school hard NBA foul where James gets elbowed in the throat, does not have any reaction towards Ginobili, and it's sort of like a common respect thing, like, hey, that was just a nice hard foul. I love moments like that. But anyway, the momentum shifting sequence to me was, and you pointed this out, James blocks a Duncan shot, James basket on the other end, ties the game with 6:30 left, and then Allen gives them the lead on his first basket of the game on the next possession, and 6 minutes to go. The Heat take the lead, and we head down the stretch.
So let's get to the stretch because it's kind of back and forth over the next few minutes. Spurs go on a little mini run. It's kind of but it's back and forth for the most part. Both teams throwing punches, and the Spurs kind of start to get in control of this game late, and we get to the final minute, and a lot of stuff happens this final minute, right? Like most games, the final minute's important, but this one it seems like when you look back on this game, you kind of forget about the way this whole final minute played out. I think, at least I did. Maybe you didn't, Mike, but you come down the stretch and the Spurs have a little bit of a lead here, okay? 1 or 2 possessions for the most part throughout. Well, they come down, the Heat come down. LeBron on 2 straight possessions turns the ball over, okay? As you mentioned, defensively, they're giving LeBron the shot. He doesn't take it, but he's got a matchup against like Ginobili. He can't get to the rim. He loses the ball. Throws a pass. I couldn't tell if it was a pass or a shot. Neither could the announcers. That goes out of bounds or gets picked up, but it's nowhere near the basket. And so back-to-back possessions, LeBron comes up with turnovers in these key moments. Meanwhile, the Spurs are kind of increasing their lead, but on the other end, the Spurs are missing a couple crucial free throws as well.
Yeah, so this down the stretch was a vintage down the stretch sort of NBA back and forth, right? Highlighted in the beginning of it with 2 huge shots by Tony Parker. He hit the 3 to tie the game with 1:30 left with James all over him. The next possession's a turnover by Chalmers. Then another clutch hoop by Parker puts the Spurs up by 2. Then, as you mentioned, we have the 2 James turnovers in a row, which leads to the Spurs increasing their lead to 5. Of note, though, Ginobili misses 1 of 2 free throws, could have put them up by 6. And at this point, we have 28 seconds left. And at this point, there's a timeout, and LeBron James looks absolutely dejected in the huddle. He looks like, what just happened? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We were in control of this game. I turned the ball over a couple times, and we're down 5 with 28 seconds left. And then coming out of that timeout, he misses another 3-pointer, but there's sort of like a scramble for the ball. James hits the 3 this time, and now it's a 2-point game.
Yeah, and also, you look at this is one of the substitution patterns you're talking about. Tim Duncan's not in the game at this point on the defensive end.
It's time number 1 where it's like you have a defensive possession where you need to get a rebound. Tim Duncan, although past his prime, is one of the top 10 rebounders in NBA history, you know?
Mm-hmm. And we see it. It bounces around. LeBron gets that second chance. Because the first one, too, was way off. I mean, it was an ugly shot. And I was sitting there thinking, he's had 2 turnovers. He has this ugly shot. And if they get a rebound there, I mean, it's over. I mean, I think the game's over. After those 3 straight possessions, or 4 straight possessions, really, forget about it. But LeBron hits that 3. Okay, now it's a 2-point game again. Get back down. Kawhi misses the front end of his 2 free throws. A big spot again for Kawhi, in and out, a great free throw shooter. So it's still just a 3-point game. Tim Duncan's out again. They put Boris Diaw back in for Duncan down the stretch, and it's another spot again where you need to get that rebound if there's a missed shot there. I know they're trying to defend that 3, but as we see in retrospect, it doesn't work out too well. LeBron again misses another 3. LeBron gets the opportunity. Offensive rebound by Bosh. When the ball's bouncing around, I mean, there's Spurs defenders everywhere. Bosh gets it. As you remember, Ray Allen floats to the corner. Bosh finds him. Ray Allen hits a clutch fadeaway. I mean, not really a fadeaway. He's able to get his balance quickly and go straight up with it. But he's got basically the entire Spurs team running at him in the replays you see. And he bangs that 3 to tie it up. But again, Duncan out of there. LeBron misses 3s, but he gets bailed out there by Ray Allen in a clutch shot.
So this sequence all starts with Leonard missing that free throw. If he hits that free throw with how things ended up turning out, it wouldn't have mattered.
Right.
Okay. But you have Leonard with the missed free throw, keeping it a 3-point game. And unexplainably, you know, it's not like the Heat went small. Chris Bosh was still in the game. So why not have Duncan in the game? Because if you notice when Bosh got that rebound, he was the only guy of consequence height-wise that was even close to the ball.
Yeah.
He was able to keep the ball above his head and find he had no pressure on him. You know what I mean? Like he was able to keep the ball above his head and find where he wanted to throw the ball out to. He throws it out to Ray Allen, who at this point in this game, I believe only had 1 field goal. He has the presence of mind to make sure his feet are behind the line. He just goes up for one of those vintage Ray Allen jump shots, which is like prettiest jump shot to watch I've probably ever seen. He knocks it down, and other than a very ill-fated Parker last possession shot, you know, we're headed to overtime. But the Greg Popovich not putting Duncan in that game, back in the game for defensive purposes, I've never heard him talk about that, but I have to think it's a huge regret.
You would think so, and we don't hear from him in this game about it. But yeah, I mean, in retrospect, you kind of wonder. But he thought he was making the correct personnel decision in the moment, but turns out not to be. But it's still a tie game going into overtime. Spurs still with a chance here, but you know, obviously the Heat have the momentum closing the game out like they did. But Kawhi Leonard has a nice overtime. It's not a very eventful start to this overtime really at all. It's kind of back and forth. But I think really the key takeaway in the fourth here for me was the Spurs having the chance here multiple times late in this game to pull out the victory, despite the Heat kind of having the energy and stuff. There's not a lot of points. I mean, you have 3 buckets on one side for the Spurs. You got 3 buckets on the other side for the Heat, and it's 101-100 with basically 2 minutes left in this game. It stays that way for a long time. A bunch of missed opportunities for the Spurs. They even get a stop late. Again, a LeBron turnover. Great defensive effort by Danny Green to knock the ball away off of LeBron's hands. But I mean, again, you have all the opportunity in the world, but the Spurs couldn't complete it, and Ray Allen ices it with 2 free throws. But I think Bosh is the other one here late in this game, Mike. Two key defensive stops, one blocking a Tony Parker shot, then the final shot against Danny Green. He blocks in the corner, which could have been a foul, and Van Gundy points it out. If this play happens maybe 10 minutes in this game, it's a foul. But here in this fourth quarter, or this overtime period, they let it go.
Yeah, to me, this overtime was marked by the following. One, the Heat's defense, most notably Bosh, like you mentioned. Okay, he was great on defense. He was great with that rebound at the end of regulation. Sort of plays you forget about and how big of a role he played. With Parker out of the game, the Spurs don't call a timeout, and it leads to one of those wild Ginobili drives. Okay, it looked to me very clearly that Ray Allen came across his arm on that drive.
Yeah,
I know it was a wild-looking drive, and it wasn't really that eloquent, but I thought it was pretty clear that Ginobili got fouled, and that was something I had forgotten about. But he doesn't get the foul call. Ray Allen down the other end hits both free throws. The Heat go up by 3 with 1.9 left. A great play design by the Spurs, by the way, for that last play.
Yeah, agreed.
That was a great play design. It's just that Bosh had the presence of mind to sort of follow Danny Green to the opposite corner. And I think that was another sort of, very up in the air kind of call that went the Heat's way. But I think more the Ginobili call, I had completely forgotten about that. And that was a pretty clear foul. When you take your arm and go across the offensive players, both arms, trying to get the ball, that's always a foul.
Yeah, you don't hear, I don't think, especially in these moments, especially a former coach, be too critical of the officials in spots like this. But Van Gundy points out a couple times, like, these guys have not called the game particularly well, and especially down the stretch there, more or less just the inconsistencies. Hey, this isn't a foul at one time in the game, but it is a foul another time. Is that shouldn't be the case, but either way, it is in a spot like this. But that's where we were in this game. So takeaways from this game, Mike. So you get the Heat wins the game, 103-100. I think one big part of this is, we mentioned Tim Duncan, great first half. You thought this would be a game where no matter what you do, Tim Duncan's going to overcome it, and you can't deal with his effort in this game. But fourth quarter and overtime, Tim Duncan 0 points, and this was the difference in the game. Was Duncan? I mean, defensively, I think the Heat did a better job. Duncan, I don't think, got as many touches, and then obviously, late in this game, substitutions defensively. But Tim Duncan was the difference. If he does anything in that fourth quarter, forget overtime. In that fourth quarter at all, the Spurs win this game. There's so many points of this fourth quarter you could point to for the Spurs, but just shocking that the Duncan basically disappeared in the fourth quarter and overtime.
I mean, if you get anything from Duncan late in that fourth quarter, we're not even talking about overtime. And I mean, just like even rebounds. Yeah. If he's left in the game and he gets 2 rebounds, the game's over. Parker, those 2 huge shots by Parker late in the fourth quarter go by the wayside now as far as history, when history looks back, because we don't even remember them. But had, the Spurs sort of held on there late in the game, had Ginobili or Leonard hit a free throw, I think Tony Parker's legacy is even more enhanced. He's a Hall of Fame player, but, he was great down the stretch with LeBron James guarding him most of the time down the stretch, we forgot to mention, which was a big defensive change that the Heat made. So many what-ifs in this game for the Spurs. A very, very tough pill to swallow. I mean, you had a top 10 player of all time in Duncan, not on the floor. You had an all-time coach in Popovich making some very suspect decisions, very uncharacteristic mistakes.
Okay, so that's one side. Let's talk about the other elephant in the room, Mike. That's LeBron James. There's always going to be a raging argument about where LeBron ranks in the annals of history. Is he better than Jordan, blah, blah, blah. But this game, and you point out how important it is for his legacy, but quite frankly, LeBron was not very good down the stretch. And if you take away a period in the fourth quarter of this game where he goes on a stretch, and a little bit in the third, but I think mainly in the fourth, where defensively he makes a big play, and then he scores, I think, 8 points, 8 out of their 10 points from about 11.5 minutes, about 8.5 minutes, kind of goes on a run there, some big plays. You take that away, though, he doesn't do a whole lot in this game, and he's bailed out, obviously, by Bosh and Allen's shot there. But, I mean, that clutch part of this game, the final minute, he made all kinds of mistakes. And the Heat, quite frankly, won despite him and despite the way he played.
Yeah, I mean, he has a triple-double in this game. So if you go back and look at the stats, you're going to be like, well, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But if you watch it, like we went back and watched it, if they end up losing this game, the headlines the next day are like same old LeBron James. Because as to this point in his career, that was the knock on LeBron, is that down the stretch, could you count on him or could you not? Because remember, the finals they won the year before against the Thunder, they were just better than the Thunder, and they won the series 4-1. So you're back in a situation now where he's playing a team that's his team's equal, and he's still coming up really short in the last couple minutes of the game. And he was bailed out by this Ray Allen shot tenfold, because they would obviously go on and win Game 7, and he would get a little bit more of the monkey off his back. But I did not remember how bad he played in the last couple of minutes of regulation. It was really, really stark.
I couldn't believe it either. I mean, it was the turnovers, the complaining, the missed threes. I mean, he did hit the 1-3 on the second chance opportunity, but every key shot he needed to hit there, you're kind of waiting for it to happen in retrospect. Like, okay, LeBron's got to keep him in it here, but he didn't. And somehow though, the Spurs could not finish it off. And I was kind of more surprised at that Spurs team, with the veterans that they had in that squad, that they could not take advantage of the way that game closed out for the Heat. And again, it came down to that ridiculous three in the corner, but still a couple of free throws there late, and the Spurs walk away with that. So the Spurs, game 4, I mean, we know the history. Heat wins the series. They take the final game 95-88 at home over the Spurs. They win their second straight NBA championship. And I think more importantly, Mike, if LeBron loses this game, and LeBron's the most important player, so we're going to point our attention to him here. If he loses this game and the Heat lose this series, they would have lost 3 of 4 NBA finals with LeBron. What do you think that does for the legacy?
Yeah, because if you remember the next season, the Spurs came back with a vengeance and blew the Heat's doors in the finals.
Yeah.
They won the series 4-1. So would that have happened that way if the Spurs won this series? I mean, you don't know. We only know how it did play out. I mean, I think you're looking at LeBron James's career, obviously completely different. And I don't think there's even a conversation about him and Jordan. You know, what really elevated the conversation and made it legit between him and Jordan was how he performed in 2016 with the Cavs. But if not for this sequence of events in this fourth quarter and how things ended up playing out, I don't know if we're even having that conversation. And I think it's huge for his legacy. And I'll give LeBron credit, though. In the post-game interview, he acknowledged those bad plays down the stretch. So it's not like he was hiding from it or had a false sense of the moment. He realized he got bailed out here. And look, that happens in the legacy of a lot of good players, where these unsung players, you know, a Mike Miller tip back to him after he missed that three-pointer, and then LeBron hits it. A Chris Bosh rebound and pass out to Ray Allen. You know, great players get the help, you know, from unsung players. You know, the Adam Vinatieri field goals for Tom Brady. You know what I mean? Like, this stuff happens, and this was that moment for LeBron James.
It was indeed. So that's kind of the difference, though. He wins two championships. He didn't win his 5, 6, 7, whatever he talked about in his press conference. But regardless, the Heat do pull this one out. And, you know, I think you're looking back on it, I'm surprised they won this game. I feel like the Spurs were maybe a little bit better team, but it's hard. I mean, it's hard to argue the Heat here. I mean, they were loaded too. And you mentioned two of the best teams to face off in an NBA Finals in a while. I mean, just balanced and loaded on both sides, and a lot of fun to watch this one. Any outdated items in this game, Mike? It's only 7 years ago, so it's hard to really point to anything. I didn't really pick up on much, except maybe some of the players that were still hanging on the roster on a couple of these teams. But otherwise, I didn't see a whole lot outdated.
No, I didn't really see much outdated at all. Again, like you said, this wasn't really that long ago, comparatively speaking, to what we normally do for games. One thing I will say is I think this Spurs team, right, with the way they played and the way they would play in 2014 in terms of pace, would really set the NBA up for the next 5, 6, 7 years with the emergence of the Warriors. The Warriors sort of took this strategy of, you know, maybe started with the Steve Nash Suns, right? Then got a little bit more fine-tuned with this Spurs team, and then would eventually lead to the Warriors and their style of play, which completely blew the doors off the whole NBA. I thought the way the Spurs played with the pace and with the getting up and down, I thought was really sort of telling for how the next 5, 6, 7 years of the NBA would sort of unfold.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point indeed. So a good game all around, Mike. What other thoughts do you have on this one before we close it out?
I mean, you keep on coming back to LeBron James, but he's one of these mega superstars. Usually the mega superstars, like a Tom Brady, a Michael Jordan, there's no doubt on their legacy, right? It's like, look, this guy was just dominant. He's the best to ever do it. End of story. It's just LeBron's legacy and the fact that not everyone is totally in sync or sort of in agreement with his legacy is fascinating to me.
I agree, and it was fun watching this game again because you kind of got a feel for that. But I think I appreciated the Spurs a little bit more going back and watching it again. That team was a lot of fun to watch and so good, and really cool to watch Kawhi make such an impact in this game, and you could kind of see how good he was going to be from this one game alone.
Yeah, and he's even fine-tuned his game a lot since then. He's gotten to be a much better outside shooter. He looked so young in this game, didn't he? I mean, yeah. I know it was only 7 years ago, but you compare him to how he looked last year with the Raptors and how mature he was and how he carried himself. I'll give him credit, though. He missed a very, very crucial free throw in this game, and you could say it cost his team a championship. I don't think that's a stretch. And he's come back even stronger from that, and again, grown into be one of the top 3 players in the NBA. So I give him credit for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So final thoughts in this game, too, by the way. Duncan was plus 16, Kawhi was plus 11, Manu was minus 21. in this game. And I think the other
bad Manu. There was bad Manu
Yeah.
and good Manu. It used to be a joke back then. But this was bad Manu.
Definitely bad Manu. And I think the Heat's effort on Danny Green in this game was big too. I mean, he hit a 3 early in this game, and right as they flashed up the graphic, and I posted it to Instagram for distant replay. So if you want to see his stats from 3 in this series, you can see it there. But after that, he didn't hit a single shot, and he was minus 12 for the game. He finished with 3 points, and he had some pretty good plays defensively. But if he could have given him anything offensively, would have been a different story too.
Yeah, he's carved out a nice little career for himself.
Sure he has.
He was on these Spurs teams. He was on the the Raptors last year. He's on the Lakers this year. We'll see what happens with them, but he's carved out a nice little career.
Nice little career. Well, that's it for game 6 of the 2013 NBA Finals. Again, this game, June 18th, 2013, right there in American Airlines Arena in Miami. LeBron and his team pulls it out, would go on to win game 7, win the series, and was the second NBA championship for LeBron James. That'll do it for us here on Distant Replay Podcast. We appreciate you listening. Please hit subscribe. Leave us a review as well, a rating. I would appreciate that. And also find us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube as well. You can watch this entire game on our website, distantreplaypodcast.com, plus all of our past games. All the broadcasts are archived right there on our website, so please check it out. Mike, enjoyed it. A lot of fun today. We'll look forward to some other games moving forward. But again, huge game. Still, we'll have a lot of discussions about LeBron after watching this performance.
The eternal debate show topic, LeBron James. Until next time, see you then.